Hello and welcome. In this video we're going to finish up looking at our Python file access by looking at this special with keyword. So this is just going to make our Python file access a little bit easier. This is not essential for file access, but it can streamline what we do a little bit. In the past, when we opened a file, we used that open function. We gave it a path and a mode, and it returned a variable of the open file that we later had to close. Using this with keyword, we specify the variable name, and we use an indented block of code, and in that indented block, the file is open using the mode that we picked, and we can do whatever it is that we were going to do with that file. But as soon as we stop indenting, Python will automatically close that file for us. So it saves us from having to worry about and remember having to do that. So I have that set up in fileread.4. Keep mistyping file. So this is pretty much the exact same thing that we had before, although I have an old commented out version where I was prompting the user for a file name. Let's be honest, I do not trust the user to enter a file name unless I've got the exceptions set up to deal with that file not existing or not having permissions, so I'm just not dealing with that. And yep, even total mass was from a different demonstration entirely that I will show in a moment. So this with keyword allows me to call that function, call that open function, and I'm using my R+, and I probably shouldn't use the word file there. It's kind of a reserved word. This is why in everything else I was doing something like calling it source file or this file or my file, or how about active file? That's a little bit better. Now I'm not using a reserved word in the language. So I'm calling my open, and my file object will be stored as this variable active file. And then I've got my colon and my indented block of code. And in that indented block of code, this file is open in R+ mode. And as soon as I stop indenting down here, the file automatically gets closed for me. I don't need to manually remember to close it, or remember to manually close it. Other than that, this program works the same way as the example in my file seek, where in fact I'm still using seek to return to the beginning of the file, and we are again replacing Voyager 1 with Professor Doom. And since this time this is now production ready code, I wanted to delete that line, and there we are. I'm not even going to print the output anymore. We are just making that change to the actual file. I will do my copy again so we know that moons is the unedited file, and when I call fileread4, we don't get any output, but if I less moons, not moose.csv, Professor Doom is indeed the discoverer of those several moons. Now, I recognize in my file objects here, my file videos, I haven't really done anything terribly interesting with the data, so there is one thing that I wanted to finish off with. If I can remember the name of the file, I think it was file action. There it is. Actually, I will take a look at the file first. So in this case, I'm still separately opening and appending to a completely different file. I'm using a for loop to read through the file object itself, and you can see in my older examples I'm still using that reserved word. So I open the one file for reading, I open a separate file for appending, and then I am simply looping through the active file. You'll notice I'm not even calling read on it. This is a really nice feature of the language, is if you loop on that file, it will do a loop with one line per iteration of the loop. And I'm pulling data out of it, splitting it up on commas, and based on the data that's in there, while the fourth field is the mass, I'm keeping track of the total mass of all of the moons. I'm displaying a message in the other file after adding the mass of the name of the moon. The total combined mass that's being calculated is this new mass, writes a new line, and then I just have an input statement here to make the script pause while I look at that. In production code, I would take that out so I wouldn't have to keep hitting enter. And then at the end, once it's all done and calculated, the total mass of all of the moons is the total mass that has been calculated. And then maybe I could average by the number of lines, or divide by the number of lines to get the average. Or I could be keeping track of how many moons were in each family, or were by each discoverer. Whatever it is that I want to do with this data as I read it. So as I go through, it's printing out the mass each time. This is why you don't leave that input junk in production-ready code, so you don't have to sit here and hit enter once per line. And the other file was stored in temp other file or something like that. Temp moon data. So after adding the mass from the moon on the first line, total mass is, and I think that's, oh, it's got some ridiculous exponent on it. I'd have to look at the data again, but it's tens of thousands of metric tons or something. I should probably have written that into the script, but I didn't. But the whole point is, if we know the source data that we're working with, we can break it apart, take pieces out, do calculations with those pieces once per line, and at the end, well, we've done some calculation. So at least something reasonably useful instead of just swapping out data and saying a moon was discovered by Professor Doom. So, what we've looked at in this lesson is how we can use that with statement so that when we open a file in Python, we can use a block of code, keep the file open for that block of code, and as soon as we're done, Python closes the file for us. It's not absolutely essential for file access, but it's a nice little feature that can make it a little bit easier to streamline your code just a bit. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.